Now when Egghead started, I don't think anyone expected one of the Gorosei to pop out, let alone all 5, and they still didn't do shit. Seriously though, the 5 elders were completely unexpected and did not disappoint. I know many will disagree with me on this stance, but allow me to show you why all of these men are monsters that could possibly beat any top tier. Before we get into the scaling, let's start with who the Gorosei are. What do they even do? The 5 elders, elder stars, elder planets, whatever the fuck, the Gorosei were first introduced as the highest authority in the world government, the degenerates who have been pulling the strings this whole time. Today we understand that's cap and they're just Emu's sons. Not literally, I'ma just stop. But by following the rules of pretty much every One Piece villain group, we can assume these 5 are the second greatest tier of fighters behind Emu, who many assume to be the final villain. By shonen logic, it would make him the strongest, meaning the Gorosei are a tier below that. Then, in the most recent chapter, they gained a new member, possibly being one of the most powerful characters in the world. A lot of assumptions, I know, but when we get into the actual scaling, you'll see why they kinda hold up. After hundreds of chapters, we finally get to see one of the elders pop out at Egghead Island, being Saint Saturn, which leads me into the purpose of the Egghead mission. See, many people downplay the Gorosei based on the fact of them failing to beat the Straw Hats, when that wasn't even their objective in the first place. Originally, the plan for Egghead was to capture the Mother Flame, Punk Records, Pacifistas, and Seraphim, plus the elimination of the Vegapunks. This means all parties on the government side, Kizaru, Vice Admirals, the Elders, can't just delete the island, which we know is possible as far weaker characters such as Moria can destroy islands with one punch. In fact, the only reason an Elder was called in specifically was because they possess the highest authority over the Pacifistas. Saturn wasn't even there for combat at first, but as the Straw Hats got lucky, things just kept getting worse and worse. The government already won when Luffy was knocked and Saturn had Boney in his hands. However, Kuma, a character that should be dead, shows up out of nowhere. Some mysterious figure gave food to Luffy, it was Kizaru, allowing him to come back to peak physical condition. Then it is revealed Boney is actually the one with supreme control over the Pacifistas, causing them to turn on the Marines. Giants pull up to save the Straw Hats, distracting the Vice Admirals. Then Vegapunk's message starts, which can only be turned off by finding a very small creature that could be anywhere on the island. And finally, in the last moment where the Straw Hats are cornered and 4 of the elders actually turn their attention towards them, Joy Boy's Haki is released, conveniently negging every one of Luffy's enemies. The simple stance of the Gorosei couldn't beat the Straw Hats is so much cap because every event in this arc is impossible to plan for. It's comical how lucky the Straw Hats got. They do every arc, but here it's very apparent. So yeah, in summary, the Gorosei got extremely unfavorable odds, and even then, 3 out of the 5 members aren't even focused on the Straw Hats for most of the time. Plus, the Elders did secure Punk Records, the Mother Flame, and all PX units. The only real loss taken was the world finally coming to understand the truth of the One Piece. Compare that to the Straw Hats, who were running the whole time / partially failed at saving Vegapunk. Now with that out of the way, we can go over where the 5 elders scale. So unlike my other vids, I gotta do something different for this section and start on hacks instead. It seems that all 5 elders specialize in different aspects of combat, however they do share some abilities. The foremost one being the power to regenerate from seemingly anything. Saint Saturn, who's widely considered the weakest of the group, took one of the most powerful Gear 5 attacks and healed from it instantly. The 5 elders also possess Conqueror's Haki. Whether or not they have advanced conquerors is hard to say, as the depiction of that power specifically has waned in the Egghead arc. It's to the point where some people don't think Luffy was using it the entire time. This is bullshit because why wouldn't he use the most powerful Haki in his arsenal when both he and his friends' lives are in danger? In my opinion, we should assume a character with ACOG is always using it at this point, with some exceptions, which makes the Gorosei possessing it irrelevant as they still match Luffy. Besides that though, again, the Elder Stars specialize in a specific field. Saturn can transform into an arachnid, being able to use poisons / some type of invisible projectile. Jupiter is a worm who can do worm things like burrow underground and suck things up.
Next to each other, high-fiving each other like, oh shit, I was just right there like
Mars is the only member who can fly as well as shoot fire beams out of his mouth. Venus is the swordsman of the group, seemingly the fastest. Mercury possesses durability far above Kaido himself. Then the newest member, Figureland Garling, is another swordsman with power that possibly rivals his son, Shanks. Now, despite all that, the elders perform pretty much the same. I'll get into how they rank in the next section, but it doesn't really matter for now, as they are all portrayed similarly. Do keep in mind their regeneration though, as it will be a main point in this video. In terms of strength and speed, we know they scale to Gear 5 Luffy. Saturn with one of his minor attacks is able to harm Straw Hat, as well as pressure him into dodging. Keep in mind Kizaru can easily speed blitz Snake Man Luffy, but Gear 5 can actually keep up with him. So Saturn forcing Luffy to dodge in this instance shows how fast he is. Add in feats such as Venus clashing a 2-sword Zoro while only using one hand, and Mercury blowing Gear 5 away with a roar, something Kaido couldn't do. There are some anti-feats like the giants being able to block their attacks or Luffy easily tagging them. However, first off, none of the Gorosei use any named attacks. Of course, there have been characters in the past who are powerful without named moves, but considering the elders having to hold back due to the objectives, it is plausible they weren't giving it their all. Second, some bring up the regeneration to argue they don't have to dodge so they never do. That logic is somewhat consistent, as every time a Gorosei member is faced with an incoming attack, it's either tanked or blocked, usually the former option. But in opposition, you could say, well, if they do have the speed to dodge these attacks, then why do they tank them, impeding the progress of the mission? It is really tough to say, since we quite literally never see one of them try to dodge, even when weaker characters confront them. Now, as you can see, it's up in the air as to whether or not they're truly on Luffy's level. However, we do have outside implications supporting said idea. When the elders pull up, Jinbei states Mars's haki is unreal, urging Zoro to escape, but in the presence of characters such as Big Mom, he don't give a fuck. He gives so little of a fuck that he suplexes and insults her. There's also the feats I mentioned before, where Venus can easily match Zoro's named attack, or how Saturn one-taps Sanji. Keep in mind these characters are either close to Kid-in-Law or above those two in terms of power. Garling's addition to the group makes them look greater as well. During the God Valley incident, he was most likely matching characters such as Roger or Whitebeard when they were near their primes. If Garling's evolution was similar to them, then he could be on the level of old Whitebeard, who is the strongest man in the world, only without any sickness. Keep in mind that sickness is what caused Whitebeard to go from matching Shanks in advanced Conqueror's haki to not even being able to use Conquerors in the war. Then, Garling is most likely going to be granted immortality by Imu, plus a devil fruit power. Another argument is their portrayal. I hate saying that. When Saturn first touched down, it's kinda implied he is an equal if not greater threat than Kizaru, not only by the moment when all the strong fighters in the arc sensed his presence, but also in the way he talks down to the Admiral. Though you could easily argue against those 2 points, they don't hold much weight. I know the elders have some really bad looks like Sanji's kick, Kuma's punch, or the weak Straw Hats beating Saturn, but these are moments where the elder in question is off guarded or just trying to get past their opponent to the true objective. So thus far, we've come to the conclusion of the Gorosei being at least close to Gear 5 Luffy in terms of base stats, with smaller feats that put them above characters such as Big Mom, Zoro, Sanji, etc. This is where we bring up the regeneration again. As I said before, Saturn, the elder with the worst showings, is still able to instantly heal from probably the second strongest Gear 5 attack we've seen. The healing is shown to be linked to Imu himself, as it seems he granted the Gorosei immortality somewhere along their lives. This implies it could likely be infinite as long as Imu still stands. I've seen people say it relies on their stamina, however, despite the elders healing from multiple lethal attacks, they never seem tired. Even at the end of the arc where Saturn gets torn to shreds by 2 versions of Gear 5, he heals back to max, not phased at all. The reason this is so important is because Luffy is close to Kaido in terms of attack power, meaning even if Kaido is able to blitz and outpace the Gorosei, What is he going to do when they just regenerate automatically? Again, I'm pulling these feats from the Elder with the worst showings, so when we get to characters like Warkuri, it's bad. As far as we know, Kaido can't do anything to Warkuri's durability unless you believe his AP is so far above Luffy, which it obviously isn't. The reason I'm referencing Kaido so much is because he's the best measuring stick for something like this. Regardless of how powerful you think he is, strongest creature, Luffy victim, whatever, he is stated / portrayed multiple times to be relative to the other top tiers. So if Kaido can't hurt them, then what does that mean for old Whitebeard, Mihawk, Akainu, and whoever else? The only characters shown to affect the Gorosei are Emeth and Joy Boy, but whatever special abilities allowing them to do this, no one else has. Even if you say it was more of a power thing, then no character of today should be that monstrous. The guy who breaks this logic though is Shanks. See, unless you're a complete glazer, you probably have the opinion of Shanks being close to Kaido in terms of power. However, the Giants compare his haki to Joy Boy, who was able to neg the Gorosei completely. If Red Hair was truly on that level, then it would break the whole power dynamic of the Yonko as we know it. I don't think it's off the table. I don't really care because I'm a Mihawk fan and everything Shanks does he just upscales from, but it seems very contradictory. Now that I have spoken on how strong they are in relation to the other groups, let's talk about how the 5 elders rank. For once, I actually agree on some of the theories the community has made because in this case they do hold up well. Throughout the video, I've been referring to the Gorosei by what planet they represent for a reason, because if you rank them based on their distance from the sun, Luffy, or the earth, Imu, it does seem simple. With today's chapter, it's most likely the latter option, as Garling is representative of the moon. Saturn and Jupiter are the furthest away from both objects, being portrayed to be the 2 weakest members. Mars doesn't have as many anti-feats as Saturn, plus he did more than Jupiter. Then of course, Venus and Mercury were clearly portrayed as the most powerful members, having far more and greater feats. Saturn's replacement should also be better than him, and possibly every other member. If Garling is like Whitebeard and is able to match Shanks or Kaido, who Luffy struggles with, then he is undoubtedly the strongest. As said earlier, the OG elders didn't really show anything that puts them above Luffy, who is the weakest top tier. Add on the fact that Figureland represents the closest celestial body to Earth, give him immortality and a devil fruit, there's definitely an argument to be made. So after all that, how strong are the Gorosei really? At a baseline, the original 5 elders have showings and statements placing them near Gear 5 Luffy and beyond characters like Big Mom. The weaker members like Saturn or Mars were stated to have massive hakis, with the most powerful possessing an ability that no top tier of today can overcome. However, the newest member could scale to even higher characters without even taking into account the powers he could receive. If you believe their regeneration lasts indefinitely, then the elders would most likely beat anyone by just outlasting them. After all, Imu seems to be the one enabling their healing, so the elders might be impossible to defeat without aiming for the king. In my opinion, it proves why they are the final villain's main subordinates, but this power is not set in stone, and if there is some special way to get around it, they're kinda cooked.